We are ready and waiting for you now. If it's a fight that you dare see, we've acquired our strength through pain. No more are we pathetic again. You are the reason why we claim that we've all become this way. And I regret this prison that I created for myself.
Hello and welcome to the Music is Life podcast. This is your host Lou Mavs. Thank you for either watching it on the Music is Life podcast channel on YouTube or listening to it on all available streaming media platforms. This is part 2 of my interview with George Fullan, General George, formerly of General Studios. In this episode, we get more in depth about his time working at Pi Studios, producing some big name artists, the pros and the cons, and the ups and the downs, a lot of that stuff. Once again, this was a 3-hour conversation that I had with George. Learned a lot about his experience and at the same time learned a lot about what was going on in his life that I had no idea. It was pretty introspective. It means a lot to me that George was this transparent about his history. One of the best subject matter experts when it comes to engineering and production that a lot of people can learn a lot from. Thanks for watching part 1. Now on to part 2.
So what was it that actually got you into the whole aspect of being a production engineer, being an audio engineer, like just being in the scene as long as you were and just getting involved with it? Or was it school? What was it in general?
So I was booking shows, and then a friend of mine, his name is Tyler King, he booked a lot of shows and was the
Wait,
main
I'm sorry. Did you say his name was Tiger King?
Tyler King.
Oh, Tyler King. Okay.
Tyler, oh, it's funny. Tiger King. I never thought of that. Tyler King. and he booked a ton of shows, great shows on Long Island and then in the city. And he was the main booker at CB's for years, like all through the 90s. Or late 90s, early 2000s. And he would book some Sunday matinees, but it wasn't every weekend like it was back then, like in the heyday of New York hardcore. But he told me, you're too nice to book shows. You have to be a little bit of an asshole. I was always like, fuck, he's right. I probably would have let some people walk all over me, club owners or VFW halls or bands or whatever. So I wasn't good at that. And then I started singing for Clockwise, and I was like, went and recorded at this studio in the city and heard my voice and was like, I am not a good singer. I shouldn't be doing this. But I knew I wanted music to be my life, and I really paid attention when Clockwise recorded and was like, this is cool. What does this do? The guy explained what a mic pre was, and EQ is an old MCI console, which I remembered later on in life. And it was to tape, and it was like, I sat there the whole time, and he recorded everything. And then it was time for me to sing, and just the whole presence of being in the studio. And then I spent some time with this band called Big Sniff when they went to record, because after that it was like anytime I heard someone was recording, I was like, can I come? Can I hang out? Can I be there? And I went upstate to this place called Sweet Fish, which was a studio in Argyle, New York. I remember Argyle, New York, because I got a ticket that ended up suspending my license about 6 years later. So
oh, geez.
I never take care of anything on myself. So, so I had to drive back to Argyle, New York, and wait for the court to open and pay this ticket to unsuspend my license. But so this guy Reese, who owned Sweet Fish, I was hanging out with him. He's a studio owner. Big Sniff was recording. And I was telling him I was interested in recording, and he was like, why don't you go to school for it? And at that point, I had no idea that you can go to school to become a recording engineer. So then I started researching schools, and that was like, you research school by like looking at the back of magazines. You didn't Google how to become a recording engineer. You went to the library and looked up recording schools and talked to people. And, I started to apply around, but I was really good at school, but I was very bored with school. So like, my grades weren't good to get scholarships or anything, and we were poor. So a friend of mine, Brian Smith, who's the drummer from Loyal to None, was like, I was talking to him at a show about it, and he was like, I go to Nassau Community College for recording. They just started a recording program. I'm in the first year of it. So I was like, oh, how do I get in touch with this? And he said, go to this office, ask for this program. They're going to have you sign up for it. And then you have to pass a entrance interview because there's only spot for 25 people. And he goes, and I know that 60 people have already applied for it. It's like, fuck. Rushed, did the whole thing, was trying to get in the second year of the program, met with the professor who's doing his name was Kevin Kelly. And Kevin Kelly said, I don't want to let you in because your grades suck, but Brian Smith is my best student. And he said, you're a good guy. So I was like,
It's
all right,
not what you know, it's who you know.
it's who you know. So I got in. I was on the dean's list two semesters in a row because I loved it so much. And me and Kevin Kelly actually became pretty decent friends through that process of learning, going, he was my professor and like I learned about recording. And then Brian Smith was like, hey, I know you're not ready to intern yet because the year wasn't over, but I'm leaving this place called Pi Studios. It's a vintage studio in Glen Cove. And you should apply for internship there. And I was like, thanks. Brian Smith called up Pi Studios and said, Brian said you're looking for an intern. I would like to be your intern. So I come in and interview. I went there and interviewed. During my internship interview at Pi Studios, this guy walked in and said, hey, I'm Perry. I'm the owner. The studio manager was interviewing me. And after about 20 minutes talking to the studio manager, they were like, yeah, you seem all right. I don't know if you're ready to intern, but Brian Smith says you're a good guy.
Oh my goodness.
So we'll think about it. And then the owner of the studio came in, this guy named Perry came in and gave me a toilet brush and said, if you clean my bathroom, I'll give you an internship. So I went in and I cleaned his bathroom for an hour and I came out and he walked in, he goes, that's the cleanest I've ever seen my bathroom. He goes, when do you want to start? And I was like, I'll start tomorrow. And the next day I was interning at Pi. And then within a month I was their assistant. So I was assisting records. And then within 2 years I was chief engineer of Pi Studios, which was maybe one of the nicest studios on the East Coast.
I've recorded there with you. It was a beautiful studio.
Yeah, we did piano, right?
We did 5 tracks with live 88 key piano.
Yeah.
In that studio. If I could tell the story real quick, I don't think it's going to get you in trouble. I remember we booked the same day as Alicia Keys.
Yeah.
We were on a time constraint. I think we had 3 or 4 hours, and one of those hours consisted of the piano being tuned. Yeah. So you told Aaron pretty much, okay, go in there, record the best you could in one take, each song, and we'll see how it sounds. And that's exactly what we did. We were able to get all 5 tracks on one take each, and you're like, it's perfect.
Yeah.
And then we had to leave because Alicia came in.
Because of that, I think because of the Alicia Keys push, we got like a really big hookup. I think he did he's like, give me $100, you're good. Because he felt so bad that Aaron got pushed out.
Yeah, but he was cool about it. And I think I remember, and Perry was just like, anytime you guys want to come back, let me know.
Yeah.
That was really cool. Unfortunately, we haven't been back since then, but
well, it's gone. I decommissioned it two Decembers ago.
What?
Yeah. I took a week off work and me and Perry decommissioned it. One of the best rooms. It wasn't doing anything. He built a room in LA and it's 1,000 times better.
So he's in LA right now then. Okay.
William Whitman and Perry Margoloff are father figures to me. They hate that I said that because that makes them so much older than me, but I'll call them mentors. Like you have mentors through your life, and I feel like those two influenced me beyond belief. Just intelligent, super intelligent men.
And very nice guy, and he was very complimentary towards Aaron. By the way, Perry, if I ever come into LA, rain check. Okay.
So I started at Pi. It was this weird thing where I was 20 and I asked my mom hey, can I quit my job? And can you cover my car insurance for a couple of months while I intern? What
were you doing at the time?
I was a security guard through school because I could just, study and do all that stuff while in school. I was watching a parking lot in Mineola or something. Actually, I know exactly where I was, but
there's plenty of parking lots in Mineola that have security. I know.
So I was, I'd sit there in one weekend day and 2 weekdays, and it just worked with school. So I did that, and then so I started interning, and I was like, hey, can I quit my job and just go into the studio full time? She's like, yeah, I'll cover you. Insurance, $40 a month or something like that. So it was a free internship, but I was there, and I remember, I was there for when they turned the key in the morning, and I was there for when they turned the key at night. And in the old days, a basic day in the studio was 12 hours. If the client was booked in at noon, that means you had to be there at 11 a.m. And if the client left at midnight, that means you cleaned up and vacuumed and did all that stuff, turned off the two mics and, whatever kind of little maintenance things you did. And I was leave at 1. So when I was an intern, I was working from 11 a.m. to 1 whenever there was a session.
When I worked with you, it was Pro Tools that we used. When you did this internship, was it reel to reel at the time?
It was reel to reel, yeah.
Mm.
24 track 2-inch. He had 2 Studio 800s that I recapped everything in the room, recapped the console. So you had replacing capacitors. If anyone doesn't know what recapping is. The third day I was interning there, and I still remember this as like a really, really important moment, was like one of the assistants he had, John, was like, hey, that second PCM 42 was making noise when we tried to use it. And Perry's like, all right, take it out, put it on the rack. And I was like, what? And he just like took it out of the rack, brought it upstairs. Perry opened it up, looked at it, found a burnt out resistor, undid the resistor, found another resistor, the same value, put it in, soldered it together, put it in, and then we sat and tested and listened to it. It wasn't noisy anymore. And I was like, that's fucked up. I was like, I never realized that you could just do that. And that was like the way of that studio was like, oh, if something broke, we moved on to the next version of it. And then I would write a report at night. And then when the clients left, I would go and take it apart and fix it. And that was such a normal part of that world where like I think some of that is missed. Now it's like, oh, I'd send it to the shop to get fixed or buy another one because everything's disposable now. But it kind of really, really taught me like how to treat gear and how to wire and like why be afraid of taking something apart? Someone put it together, someone built it.
Right now I own about 4 guitars myself, and I do bring my stuff over to All Music in Plainview because I trust Guy Brogna and his team. I mean, they've taken care of my stuff, my 4 guitars and my bass, and they always take care of my wife when she's got to buy stuff for school. Guy has always been very helpful when it comes to certain things about maintaining your instruments. Yeah. And he says, one thing you want to do is invest in a soldering iron. And there were a couple of times where my Strat, because I do have a modified Fender Mexican Strat where I replaced the single coil in the bridge with a DiMarzio Super Distortion humbucker pickup, just because I like the tone of a humbucker and a Strat more than the single coil. So there was a part where it was cutting out, just opened it up, saw that it just needed some soldering, boom, 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 put it back together again, good as new. As I've gotten older, I'm more about having fewer instruments that I can take care of and just focusing on getting the best that I can out of those. I just make sure that I take care of my stuff. I hate it when they mistreat instruments and they're like, oh, it's crapped out on me. Well, you probably bang it around a lot. And to me, it's always just been more important to know your craft and know your instrument rather than just be show-offy. And unfortunately, there's still too many people that are like that when there's no reason to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's also like one of my philosophies in the studio is having good sounding stuff before you get to the microphone. My studio, when you were there, had an AC30, I had a Hiwatt, I had a Marshall, I had tons of stuff. And then I had a couple of really nicely set up guitars and all that stuff that anyone could play. And my whole theory was like, these bands are coming off the road. Their stuff is beat up. Here's something nice to play. Here's like a special event, like you're in the studio recording. Let's get your sound, and then let me see if I can beat it. Or let's get your sound. Let me see if I could add to it.
You always had the best selection of tube amps in your studio, and I remember that Hiwatt. I recorded Beneath the Curve with that high. I did. I was just like, I could put a bass through a guitar amp, and you said yes.
That was one of Whitman's Hiwatts. So when I closed my studio, I gave it back to him. I have a good sounding B15 in my basement, which I do bass through, which actually now it's funny. Everyone does bass DI. So like now I reamp the B15 because that's the proper bass amp.
Oh yeah,
But
I'm sure you know that Tech 21, they have DI boxes for bass.
for my ears, for some reason, I need a moving speaker and I need a microphone. It just never sounds. It always sounds 2D. It's like I can't grab it. It's like a weird. It's like a weird thing. And who knows if I'm right or wrong? It's just my taste. It's my aesthetic. But
No, whatever works for the individual, I guess. I
yeah,
mean, it's funny because I remember back in my touring days, I had the half stack. I had the Crate Blue Voodoo 120-watt tube and whatever cabinet I could get my hands on. And that was my live rig. Then my live rig now, if it was a smaller venue, it was a Marshall 30-watt solid state amp that I just put the mic on and ran it through the PA, and it
mhm,
gave me the loudness that I
yeah,
wanted. And my primary amp is actually right next to me. It's a Black Star Tube HT Soloist 60. Before, when I was looking for as many watts as I could, now I'm just like, well, I'm not playing the Garden.
yeah.
And I think it's just important for me to play something compact, but something that has a quality sound. What's your take on that? Like, I mean, I know you say yeah, and I agree with you because it's nice to have tone coming through an amp, but knowing what we know now, especially about live performances, because some people still want the half stack. Do you think it's even necessary anymore?
Yes and no. If you're playing clubs like the downtown and whatever, it's like I feel like a 4x12 and a 100-watt amp. You need it because you don't know what kind of PA support you're going to get. You don't know the front of house. You should somewhat have a somewhat loud stage. All front of house guys are mad at me right now.
Get
Say you
over
should,
it.
yeah. I always say you should have an 18 or a 15-inch speaker for bass. I don't fucking care about what your 410 or your 810 cabinet is voiced at. I just think having a large speaker for bass is important. That's maybe a little bit old school, but when we were playing in 3 Years Older, like my bass player didn't agree with me, and I went out and bought an Ampeg 15, one for the studio, but two to play live with 3 Years Older. And we started playing live with it. And he goes, "Fuck." I just felt like I needed that bottom end on stage for when I was singing. Because I
Hmm.
mostly sing to the bass. It's just the way, because I was a bass player. So like it's mostly where my vocal lines come from, is like, good bass lines kind of. I just always think it's important to have that. But and a 4x12 is great. But like if you're playing arenas and you're playing with in-ears, who the fuck cares what you have on stage? Like, but there should be an amp somewhere that maybe a little bit isolated that someone's playing some good sound. I mean, in the studio, like I kind of hate any amp that's over 50 watts because I can't turn it up because I'm going to blow up the mics or whatever. Or in my pre's, like it's a pain in the ass to have a loud amp in the studio. So like, I mean, I'm sitting in front of like a 100-watt orange right now, but a 30-watt AC30, a 5-watt Epiphone Valve Junior, which I love to record with. I got a THD Flexi 50, which is like a little bit of a takeoff of a Marshall, but also then more. And that goes down to 20 watts, and you could really kind of crank that 20 watts to get a microphone on a speaker. But
Hmm.
like, I very, very rarely record guitar direct. I won't even take a direct channel as like, maybe I'll change it in the mix. It's like I'll only record direct if I'm going for a certain sound where I need a direct, I'm trying to do a weird delay effect that I need in the box. I'll record a guitar direct to get the weird delay effect, but like I'm not putting amp plugins on that guitar. It's like I want that sound because to roll back to learning how to record to tape, I come from a world of like every great engineer I worked with on the good records I worked on, they would say when you push the fader up 2 weeks from now, you want your sound that you want in the mix on that fader.
Hmm.
And and that forces you to make a decision at the time. So like, we were at Pi and someone's like, "Oh, I want to play a lead. What do you got?" And I'd be like, "Oh, there's a really good Fender Twin. Let me set it up." And that Twin would kind of influence them to play the lead. And then, either I was engineering or another engineer would like, "Oh, I want, the Neve mic pre, because there was a Neve there through an LE2A, and that would record to channel 14 or whatever." And like anytime weeks from then, or when it went to mixing, they'd push up that fade, they would go, "Oh fuck, that Twin sounds so good."
Mm.
And because that influenced other stuff in the song. So to me, like one of the things that Pro Tools engineers do is they record a direct guitar, they record a clean version of it, they record a dirty version of it, and then it just prolongs the decision until you mix. And to me, that's never good, because then it's like, what could a great guitar solo sound influence the singer to sing the next day? Or what could a great rhythm guitar sound influence a horn section or a string section or like a tambourine? But like it's all like the building the tracks. You should really get it as close to mix ready as possible when the mic goes on the amp. To me, I always hate like, oh, we'll take care of that in the mix, or we'll we'll do that stuff. It's like some stuff you have to do in the modern world, because like we're competing with records in the Pro Tools world, so everything's slammed. So like if you record a drummer and it's kind of like, shit, his consistency in hits isn't that great, it's like, I know I'm putting a sample under it and I'm pushing it to the top, so every fucking hit it sounds like he's fucking mad at that snare drum. That's being competitive. But like with guitar tone and bass tone and even vocal tone, or like percussion and all that stuff, it's like it should really be as close to the final product. I really like the moment of building up a record. It's my favorite part of making a record is getting the tone and working each song. Like, I'm at the point now where I'll put a mic up, I got the pre-up, I got a little compression on it, the guitar player will start playing the songs, play your part, and then I'll walk over and tweak the amp to the way I want it to sound like 3 weeks from now when I'm going to mix. And they're always like, I some of the guitarists I've been recording lately, it's like, fuck, I know I fuck up when George walks over and starts turning the amp knobs. Like, I know it's not a take when he starts fucking around.
Kind of harkens me back to some of the stuff from the 60s and 70s, and even early 80s, I'll say, to an extent. Like a lot of those warm sounds that came from the amps that the musicians were using in the studio. I've really been listening to like a lot of fusion records from the 70s, and mostly Alan Holdsworth. And I know that in our conversation outside of this, I was talking about my love for Holdsworth, and I talk about him on the podcast as much as I can, because I think he's one of the most underappreciated guitarists. That when I listen to that stuff and I'm hearing the sounds that he got, and to think, the perfect timing that the musicians that he was playing with, I think it was Tony Williams, I think it was the drummer that he was playing with at one point, guys like him, guys like Gary Husband, guys like Chad Wackerman, they didn't need a click track. It was, they went in there, they knew their skill, they knew their craft, they knew their instrument, and they just went in and they got the best sounds with what they had, and they released some great products because they took the time to really say, we can do this better, but let's work it out before we go into the studio. And then, jazz musicians, they're always on a set budget, because it's not one of the lucrative genres out there. But, they went in, they did their thing, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then boom, they released a great product. And you listen to some of the stuff from Weather Report, you listen to some of the stuff from IOU, and it's just like, oh my God, how good it sounds. And it's just like, I think you would have thrived in an environment like that.
It's one of those things where, and I've had other engineers and other producers and stuff like, man, you're fucking 10 years too late. Like when you started, like you saw the heyday. And I tell this story all the time. Like the first session I was an assistant engineer on, there was a band from New Jersey called Love in Reverse. And
Heard
this
of
was
them?
like 1994, 95 or something like that. And they were in the studio for 3 months, 12 weeks, or a little bit of pre-production actually, tracking, overdubbing, and mixing, all done at Pi over 12 weeks. It was like a 2-week break before mixing. And the album sold 1,500 copies. It was on Sire Records.
1,500 copies total?
1,500 copies total. And it was like,
Jesus
oh yeah, that
Christ.
sucked. And it was like, yeah, okay. And then, they might have done another record, or they, did a video. I've made records for $1,500 that have sold 20,000 copies. It's like, that's the reality that we live in. It's like the music industry was so crazy back then. There was just so much money that people just made mistakes. The 2000s came and Napster happened, and they really kind of saw the writing on the wall. They got rid of everyone, and instead of having 50 artists and 3 hit making artists that pay for everyone, you have 7 artists, and 5 of those artists are making hits. and they're hardly paying for themselves.
I remember one of my internships when I was in college was for a record label. I got to intern at NG Records, which ended up becoming Artemis Records.
Yeah.
At the time, '09 was on the label. They had just signed Kitty. So this was the summer right before their album Spit dropped, right before they got the Ozfest 2000 tour. And I learned a lot from working there, where I was able to learn how to make press kits. I learned
Mhm.
how to make calls and speak with radio stations about getting ads
Yeah.
and things like that. So, I kind of learned how to talk to
Hey, is
people.
your
And
program director there? Oh, Marjorie. Hey, this is Lou from blah blah blah. Yeah.
yeah, it was pretty cool like that. And I got to thank Tom Smitty Smith, because he was the gentleman that I interned for. I learned a lot working for him. I'm not gonna lie, the wheels in my brains were thinking, I can learn this stuff so that when I have a band, I can get signed. And then, like you said, the next year, Napster hit and completely changed the game.
Yeah.
And
I do think their reaction initially was poor, but then that was the rise of indies, because being an up and coming engineer in the late 90s, I would meet the interns at the record labels. I would meet, the A&R assistants and stuff. And then you cultivate those relationships, because those A&R people would get you work. Like there was tons of times where I'm like, hey, I just signed this band. I want you to demo them. And it was like, all right, cool. But then, 1999, I had several of those people. We would talk, we'd see each other at different things, like, the different festivals. We'd schmooze, and, I'd help them with, like, oh, get these speakers for your office. I'd do different, I was like helpful to them. And they were like good friends. Like some of them were good friends. And then literally they were all gone.
yeah.
It's like 2001, they all got fired. They laid off like 2,500 people in the music industry in New York in 2001.
My late brother was actually the head of HR for the IT department at Universal Records. So I know that was an unfortunate time. I think the last A&R guy that I dealt with was Mike Gitter over at Roadrunner Records. He had just signed Killswitch Engage from Ferret. I think it's safe to admit that Slipknot was the band that brought Roadrunner to the forefront. It feels like Killswitch Engage, they took it to the streets, because at that point, 2002, 2003, Killswitch was the band that everybody was talking about.
Yeah, but I think Roadrunner had a deal with like Atlantic, or Atlantic's like distro or something like that, and then that fell through for them.
They were through
2000.
Universal at one point,
Universal,
and
yeah.
then it switched over
But it was like
to
Universal
Atlantic.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
Universal and Atlantic merged or something. It's I used to know all this shit. And it's like such a fucking waste of space now in my brain.
At the time, Roadrunner, they had bands that I didn't care for, with the exception of like Fear Factory and Typo. They had Cold Chamber that I was just not a fan of, and that was at the time that new metal was very popular. And Roadrunner did have some good bands though. Right before Cold Chamber exploded, they had Both Worlds, which is John Joseph from the Cro-Mags. They had that was great. They had signed Vision of Disorder, they had signed Earth Crisis, and Sepultura at the time was releasing Against, their first album with Derek. So it was great to see the hardcore element of what they call loud rock.
What was Orange 9 on? Who was Orange 9 on?
Orange 9mm. Well, I know they started on Revelation, then they went to Atlantic, and then they went to NG, Artemis.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where I interned. That's where I met Shaka. Actually, I just messaged him on Instagram, and he was just like, "Oh, Lou, I remember you." And and funny enough, he went to high school with my brother who passed away, and he was just like, "How's Mike doing?" And I'm like, "Ah, dude, Mike passed away 5 years ago." But I told him I'm good now. I texted him a picture of my daughter. She's like, "Oh, she's beautiful. God bless." And
Nice.
it was just great. It was nice to see that Shaka is still a grounded guy, and you run into people who were in the hardcore scene around the time that you were part of it. I wouldn't say the time that I was part of it. I mean, because a lot of those guys were fickle anyways. I'm grateful to say that I'm boys with Tyler and Will from Cripple Dern, who at the time when I was doing gigs, they were in a band called Your Day Strong. And then Tyler ended up joining My Bitter End and then Dr. Acula. I'm really, really happy with what Crippled Earn is releasing. I mean, it's like old school punk influenced hardcore. And
I gotta check it out. I'm not familiar.
And there's no pretensions about what they're doing. They're just like, yeah, we're not looking to make $1 million. We're weekend warriors. They have families, they work full time during the week, and they were out doing shows on the East Coast on weekends and, doing their thing. And I'm just like, wow, You know, that's great. There's
I
no
mean, that's,
pressure to try to be something
yeah,
that they're not. But
that's
yeah,
everyone
it's
I know. Yeah.
but it's just crazy how topsy-turvy the music industry became because of Napster. And I agree with you. I think that the end result of what happened is, I think, the most unfortunate circumstance, because it's still the label that's making money from it as opposed to the artist.
Yeah.
And it kind of sickens me that up until now we were living in a time where for artists to recoup their losses, they were doing like $1,000 meet and greets before the shows
Yeah.
and things
Well,
like that. And concert tickets are just so
yeah.
fucking expensive now, it's ridiculous.
Well, I don't think anyone's making money. I mean, if you're not a touring band, I don't care if you sell 100,000 records. I just don't think there's any money. I think it's one of those things where it's like people just expect it for free.
If I
People
could,
just expect music to be free.
if you could be honest with me, do you think we're at a point where musicians should never quit their day job if they want to do what they want to do?
It depends what their day job is. Like, I don't, it's like, I don't, I mean, anything, like, I'm in the mindset of like, it takes hard work to do anything,
Mhm.
right? To be successful in anything, it takes hard work. Like, where I am in my industry, I feel like I'm successful and it took a lot of hard work. And it's like, not like the hard work goes away, my day job. I'm working hard. We're, I mostly deal with baseball streaming, and spring training started today. And like, I'm looking at, probably 60-hour weeks where I'm also then on 24 hours a day and need to fix problems, for the next 7 months. Like, that's
Mhm.
that's my next 7 months, is I'm just going to be working. And that mindset is I think has got me where I am in my industry, is that I don't, like, it's 40 hours doesn't make sense to me. In anything I've ever done, 40 hours a week there's not enough time to do anything.
No, I
Um,
agree. I,
you
I
you
always
have
feel like
you
the
have to work
biggest
really hard.
problem.
So like if you're a band and you're, the only thing with like the only thing with the music industry is fickle. It's like you could be the best guitarist in the world, and and if you don't have good taste in your songwriting, or get with someone who's good, no one's going to ever hear you, because it's just not going to get popular. So
Hmm.
like, who knows what the I don't think anyone knows what the equation is. Like, we talked in the past about like Baby Shark, and like how the popularity of that song, but we also said like that song was everywhere for a whole summer, and how much money did they really make from the actual song? It's like nothing. They're probably making everything on merchandise or whatever they had set up. will
Yeah.
will that will that family who came up with that song come up with another hit? I don't know. but like
It,
but like is
it's
that the music industry? I
it's
mean,
the
I'm
biggest
using it.
one-hit wonder single.
I know I'm using it I'm using it as an extreme example, but like, I mean, like, yeah, to go back to like some of the earlier stuff we were saying, like, I think if you take the fantasy out of music and your career, um, I always say that that's an important step in just being a musician, because 100 years ago, if you could play a mandolin or or an acoustic guitar, or like a little snare drum, and you sat on your porch and you played some music for your family and friends every other Sunday, and you all sang together. I mean, that was an amazing thing. That was a great time that like could be passed down through generations.
Hmm.
Why is that not still good enough? Why is getting on a stage in front of a fucking $100,000 PA in front of 20,000 people the height of what people want? Like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I'd rather just be playing songs and music for my friends and family. Like, I want to be better at guitar so I can play songs for my sons. But that's my mindset. Like, and I've shared that with people in the past, and I'm like, like, who cares about the fantasy of being famous? That's only 60 years old. That's only from Elvis. People going
I
crazy in the street for you.
I have to be honest. I'm of the same mindset as you. I admit I thought differently back then, and I think that's because of the environment that I was in, with people who heard what they heard on records that were released by Vagrant or Drive Through, and they're like, "That's what I want to do," and
Yeah.
we have to do exactly everything as they do so we can get to that point. And I'm just like, why don't we just have fun?
Yeah.
Because to me, it's like if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, and I've always been this way, if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, I said, you know what? In 2003, I said this. As cool as it would be to be on a major label, because at the time I didn't realize that all a major label was just a big loan that they would
Yeah.
give you, but you'd have to pay that back plus
Yeah.
interest. And that's not just indie labels, but that's major labels as well.
It's everyone. Yeah. Yeah.
But I was thinking, it would be cool to be the first band to release this stuff independently. And at the time, iTunes was a thing. And if you were an independent artist, you could release your stuff on iTunes.
You still
And
can.
yes, you can.
I
But
buy. You know what? I buy tons of stuff on iTunes because it's the best money breakdown. Besides like Bandcamp Fridays and all that stuff like that.
Mhm. I said this in 2003 that we don't have to sign to a label. We could just do everything independently and just reap the benefits. And I'd rather do it that way. And I remember my bass player thought I was crazy at the time. He was just like, "Oh no, we're never gonna get this." And he was the one that was pushing us to sound like Finch or like Census Fail or
Yeah.
this and that. And I'm just like, dude, I don't write like that. I mean, like, if I could think of everything that's ever influenced me growing up, I could say that I'm as influenced by Black Sabbath as I am influenced by Minor Threat, as I am influenced by Fishbone, as I am influenced by Gordon fucking Lightfoot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to me, it's like I've always said there's two kinds of music. There's good music and there's music you don't like. If I'm going to block out everything that's good because it doesn't follow one specific genre, then I'm doing more of an injustice to myself as a musician or as a music writer
Yeah.
than anything. I feel like that's more damaging. I think it's good to be influenced by different forms of art, whether it's
Yes.
literature, whether it's audible or visual, anything. So and it just got to a point where I just like, you know what? I don't think I have what it takes to be one of these rock stars that's on a label. And I don't care if I ever do, because if I'm not writing music for myself, what am I doing it for? I
Yeah.
mean, it's very easy for me to just like, write, like my girlfriend broke up with me and this and that type stuff. And I'm just like, but I don't want to do that. But
Yeah.
And making $1,000,000 from it was never the reason why I did it for the first place.
Several great points you made there, but there is good music out there that I don't like, and and then there's Kiss, which I don't like and is not good music. Yeah, Gene Simmons. No, but that's
And their music never got me laid anyway.
Yeah, I don't think music ever got me laid, but I wasn't playing music to get me laid or whatever. I don't even know why I started singing for Clockwise. You know why I started singing for Clockwise? Because I could book shows and I was popular, and Ed wanted good shows. So he was like, "Yeah, you sing for Clockwise." And it was like, it made sense for him. And I think that's like any hardcore singer starts singing, like, and then I started loving it. I wasn't like obsessed with it. And, I definitely lived without it for years. And then, I was in that other band 3 years older, which was sort of a little bit more of like an experiment. All of 3 years older songs are standard song structure.
When I first heard 3 years older, it reminded me of Bane a little bit. Like it had that hookiness, it had that melody,
and it was heavy at times, like
Yeah, and I enjoyed the hell out of that album, and I really loved your cover of Time After Time. That was beautiful.
That could be a story. So we covered Time After Time because William Whitman, who agreed to record the 3 years older record, who was a good friend of mine, recorded She's So Unusual. He was the engineer and sort of, helped produce that record, Cyndi Lauper's first big record. We were going to track the drums at a studio outside Philly at the guy who wrote Time After Time with Cyndi Lauper, this guy, Rob.
Wait a minute, that's not one of the members of the Hooters, is it?
It is the guy from the Hooters. So
oh my God.
I worked very closely with, as an assistant engineer, and did some engineering for this little production team. This guy, Rick Chertoff, who's a producer, William Whitman, who's an engineer, and Rob Hyman had like a little kind of songwriting production crew. And they would do a lot of stuff at Pi because Whitman really loved the console at Pi. So that early on, some of the early records I assisted on were Whitman, Chertoff, and Hyman making music for all different kinds of stuff. They actually made a really, really awesome record called Largo, which is hard to find, but like that might be up your alley, that record. It's like, it's just a fucking great record. I listen to it all the time still.
Now, is that the same team that did One of Us from Joan Osborne? Pretty much all of them?
Yes. So I started working at Pi right as One of Us was done. And actually the first session that I assisted on, which ended up me getting the assistant job at Pi, Joan wanted to record the vocals different for the video. There's some stuff that she did on the record that she didn't like. So the song that they used for the video is a different vocal performance for One of Us. The assistant, I think, dropped a very expensive mic at Pi. A week later, Perry had found the dented mic and called me into the studio and was like, "We're sorry, we can't use you anymore, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Well, you dropped a U-47 and we found it and you tried to hide it." And I was like, "Nothing for nothing, but I don't know what a U-47 is." And he went into the mic closet, grabbed it, and I was like, "I've never seen that mic before. I'm sorry." And he believed me, called the assistant, and he was like, this guy named Nick was like, "Hey, what happened to this mic on this date?" And he goes, "Well, I dropped it. It's old anyway." And he goes, "Nick, lose my phone number."
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Nothing for you. So as they say in Canada, peace out.
Hung up and came to me and goes, "You need to learn the room because you're the new assistant."
Now we are so happy we do the dance of joy.
So I was like, okay, just ignorantly honest is I got my job, and that was that Joan Osborne thing. But anyway, so I thought it would be a funny idea if we recorded Time After Time at the guy who wrote the song with Cyndi, with the engineer who recorded the original song. And it was great because, like, you know, Whitman is a bass player and sat and you know, grabbed the bass from my bass player and was like, "You know, I always heard this way," and played the bass on the 3 Years Older cover. I mean, that's Whitman playing bass, not, and he, you know, legitimately had a good idea in 1984 or whatever to play a bass part, but they went with another kind of part. So he got to play the bass he wanted on the 3 Years Older cover. And Cyndi heard our cover and loved it. I always said I sound like drunk karaoke on that song, but she loved it. And you know, and because I worked so closely with Whitman was her touring bass player because he loves playing live. Spent a lot of time playing live in different bands and stuff like that. But when Cyndi was looking to tour, I guess sometime in the 90s, Whitman started playing with her and became her musical director, which is, if anyone doesn't know, a musical director of a touring band is like the person who makes sure the song structures are right, make sure that everyone's playing the right parts, like making, you know, make sure all that stuff, and works with the artist to make sure that whatever tour they're on and all that stuff like that is taken care of. So that's what Whitman did for her. And Whitman worked on most of her records through the 90s. And I was assistant on a lot of those records. I did a little bit of engineering. I met Cyndi the first time when I was in Clockwise. And after a couple of weeks working with her, Bill was like, "Oh, George is in a hardcore band." And she sat and listened to all, you know, the whole Clockwise EP with me in the studio with her. It was a very surreal moment. And then ever since then was like, "Oh, I love what you're doing." Like, she understood I wasn't really a singer. But like, I sang on 5 of her songs through the years, one of them being a Christmas record. And I think 2 Christmases ago, we were in Costco, me and my wife, and I was like, "Oh, that's me in the chorus." And, you know, she picked out my voice singing on the chorus of a Christmas song, whatever song it was on a Cyndi Lauper record.
That
It was
is
like a
pretty
fun,
cool.
kind of fun thing, like, you know, fun story like that. That's why we did Time After Time. And also, Time After Time is a fucking great song.
It is.
It's such a good song.
You can't listen to that song without getting choked up. And to me, those are always like the best songs because, you know, it gets you right here.
Yeah.
And I love and respect the shit out of Cyndi Lauper. She was from Queens, so I felt a kinship with her music because, you know, I grew up in Queens as well. And also, she had Captain Lou Albano in her music videos, and we grew up wrestling fans in my family, so that was a positive notch in her hat for us. So
the first night I'm working with her, really late, she had a deadline. I forgot what record it was for, but it was like, it was like a 20-hour session. And at like 4 o'clock in the morning, I had like an eyebrow ring, and she's like, she's trying to figure me out the whole night. So then we're sitting, I'm doing some tape playback for her. Whitman's like resting his ears, and we're just going over some stuff. And she looks at me, she goes, "Oh," she goes, "that eyebrow piercing." She goes, "That hurt?" And I was like, "No, I don't know. It just was like a pinch for a second. I had like a little eyebrow ring."
Mm-hmm.
She goes, "My friend used to pierce with the gun through his face." And I was like, "Oh man," I was like, "that sounds painful." And she goes, "Oh, you probably know him, Captain Lou Albano." And I was like, literally like flashbacks to when I was like 8 years old, watching
Oh
all
my
that shit
God.
go down on like the WWF, the
Never,
World Wrestling Federation.
never understood the rubber bands through the face, but I mean, that was Captain Lou in a nutshell.
She
But
just thought that it there was a he she was like, "Oh, he was crazy, but I loved him." Blah blah blah. She told me some stories about it, and I was like, it was it was crazy. And then
was there a difference between Cyndi the artist and Cyndi the person?
I would say on so many levels, but I think coming from like a punk background that I come from, and then she could relate to me on that, and also like how comfortable me and Bill got with each other. Hundreds of hours in the studio with just the three of us. I definitely got to see a side of Cyndi that maybe not everyone gets to see, but I don't think it was that different. I mean, she definitely speaks her mind and all that stuff. She's it's not like there's an evil person sitting.
No, I wasn't
behind her.
insinuating
Yeah.
that at all. I'm just saying, like,
I do think she is way more talented than what you see on her records, and there's proof of that just being in the studio with her. She did this amazing thing one night that was like, it was like a little bit of a vocal vamp, and she did it and went off and stepped away from the microphone and really kind of controlled the way her voice sounded in the room to the mic that was there to her headphones, and did this whole crazy thing that we're all like floored by.
mhm.
Comes in, she's like, "Yeah, I want to listen to that." You listen to it, and she goes, "That's too much. My audience isn't ready for that." Walks back into the room and does this same exact thing, just 40% less. And that's the take she used. I was like, I've never seen anyone have that much control of the environment, their voice, any of that stuff, and make it sound sincere. It was crazy.
Damn.
She sings on that Largo record that I talked about earlier, and she does yodeling at the end of one of the songs on it. The project is called Largo, and it just has tons of artists on it. It's the 100-year celebration of the song Largo, and it's just all songs about coming to America. It's fucking great. The Chieftains are on it. Taj Mahal plays on it. Levon Helm's on it. Like, it's a fucking sick record. And it did nothing. The label went out of business when it came out, and they spent a year on the record. It's crazy.
Is Cyndi someone you still talk with today, or?
I ran into her. Like, I was at work. It was like 3 or 4 years ago. I ran into her at the coffee shop at work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Cyndi," and she went, "Ugh." And then I was like, "It's George," and she goes, "Holy shit!" And then gave me a big hug, and we sat and caught up and all that stuff like that. But
That's cool.
It's not someone that I'm texting or like emailing and get in touch with. Every once in a while, if she's playing and I want to see Bill, like, I'll be like, "Hey, Bill, get me tickets," and I'll get tickets and go. There was one night. This is 10 or 12 years ago, where she found out that I was coming and she wanted me to sing on one of the songs I sang on the record. So Whitman was like, "If you don't want to sing tonight, hide until Shine is played." So I was like, "All right." So I avoided her until after the song that she wanted me to sing on, because she saw my name on the list and she was like, "I want to get George up." So I hid in the front of house, and then during one of her songs, she runs around and all I hear is, "George!" And I look up and she's like over the front of house board, pointing and basically yelling at me on the microphone in the middle of one of her songs. And I was like, "Oh, Cyndi." And then after that, she's like, "Whitman told you I was looking for you, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." I'm in a video with her, a Money Changes Everything acoustic video with her, and I got Adam from Taking Back Sunday to do Money Changes Everything. There's a record she put out. It's a great sounding record called The Body Acoustic. It's all her songs kind of acoustic. Whitman recorded it. It's fucking great, that record.
I'll definitely check that out.
I'm in a video that you can find on YouTube, clapping along, and I sing a little bit of yeah, yeah, yeahs in it.
Nice. Okay.
So yeah, it's my life with Cyndi.
So we got one of the more positive experiences you have. So I'm sorry, I have to bring it up.
Why are we laughing?
A certain progressive metal band out of Long Island, because you told me the horror stories with that once.
Oh, that was that.
Can we say the name of the band?
I don't know. I don't want to. That comes down to my musical taste, and I just wasn't really that into it. And the band is Dream Theater,
Okay, he
and
said it. I didn't.
yeah, Dream Theater is a very talented band,
Definitely can't take that away
and
from them.
because they're so talented, and they're a musicians band, that some of them had some ego problems, and I knew that going in, and I was the chief engineer at the studio, and they booked Pi out for 6 weeks, and I had a bunch of indie projects that I could do on the side, and just hired another engineer to work the project.
Was
and,
the
and spent a little bit of time in the studio with them, and there were actually two of the members were extremely nice,
Mhm.
and I like spending time with them and talking shop and stuff like that. But the album was 80 minutes long, and it was 6 songs or something like that.
I want to piggyback actually on something you mentioned before, because you were talking about like when you would look in the back of magazines to find out like engineering schools. I think I remember at the time in like the late 80s, early 90s, there was the Musicians Institute of Technology. I think it was one of the big ones in California. I remember seeing advertisements for them in like Guitar World and Bass Player Magazine, and I think even maybe some of the metal mags like Hit Parader and Circus. I could be
Yeah.
completely wrong about that.
There was
But
there was that. There was SI.
SIR Studios?
No, that's the rental place who my nephew works for.
Mm.
It was some or ST or AARI. There was like Audio Institute,
Audio Recording Institute? I think I've
Audio
heard of them.
Recording Institute, ARI. So my friend Juan went there, and that was a good program. That was New York City. And then there was some 4-year programs at state schools. There was one upstate that was like a lot of great engineers came out of that program, but you had to like play an instrument to get in. I wasn't that good at any of that stuff, and it was expensive. So Nassau Community College for me.
Nothing wrong with that. Hey, look, if my daughter tells me she wants to go to community college for 2 years to wet her beak in something and see if she likes it or not, I'd be like, hey, better spending it at a community college than dropping tons of dollars on a university or anything like that, especially for something that you're not sure if you want to do.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like the 20% I learned, and it's basically like how the ear works, how sound waves work, what's a low frequency, what's a high frequency, like basic stuff, a little bit of tape editing, no real music production, just like this is how a dynamic mic works. This is how a condenser mic works. This is how a ribbon mic works. Like this is what a mic pre does, but no real influence of like a Neve mic pre is better than an SSL mic pre because of these elements. Like none of that stuff. Just basic fundamentals of engineering. We also learned music theory, and music business was a course that we had. He put together a good program. Kevin Kelly put together a really good program. It's still going on. He's not the head of it anymore, but it's still going on. Nassau Community College. But if I didn't learn that stuff, I wouldn't be able to learn the stuff that I learned, in the real world working in. One of the great things about Pi was it was such a fancy, expensive studio that I hardly engineered, but like I was working with all the top engineers and producers at the time. Like the Joan Osborne record was the biggest record in 94 or 95 or whatever. I mean, it was a huge record. I got to work with that team that made that record, on 3 more records over the next 4 years. So like just being a fly on the wall for like how records got made, I think, helped me engineering and all that stuff. And then I lived in this weird world where I had like one foot in this super major label, high echelon studio where I was only working with major labels. I was on the phone with these people, like getting tape sent and doing all this different stuff. And then on the other side of it, I was going to hardcore shows, and I was like in a hardcore band where I was like playing in front of 30 people and was like totally psyched. Like, we'd show up in Pennsylvania and play a basement. It was like my favorite thing in the world. to play in front of 30 people in a shitty basement, where we're getting electrocuted. And then I'd go to work and I'd work with someone who like already had, a couple of hit records and all that stuff, and just living in that world. And I lived in this both sides of it. And it's like, that's, was me, like the dichotomy of Georgia just made sense. So I never thought to make money. I never thought to record hardcore bands or punk.
Mhm.
I just was like, oh, this is my career and this is my life. Like, I'm a hardcore kid. And then sort of started to meld them together. And that's when I, kind of was like, I'm not going to make money off the hardcore scene. I never wanted to make money off the hardcore scene or punk, but I could own a small size studio and record all day long, and get by. And that's kind of what had me move towards opening General Studios.
And I remember recording with you when I think your studio was based in West Babylon first.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you shared the same building, The Sleeping, November Kills,
My
and
neighbors.
and yes, they were your neighbors in
Yeah.
separate rooms. I think even Doug slept in the studio.
Yeah. I lived in that studio for a couple of weeks too,
I just remember the tracking for my wife's CD, Beneath the Curtain, and just feeling like it was the most comfortable environment. We weren't on a time budget, but money was, I guess, the one factor, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't waste your time.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make sure that whatever we did were the best performances. And the way you just had it set up over the course of a couple of years, because we would come to you when we had the money to pay. You were like, "Hey,
I
George, we
know.
got some money. Let's do it."
And
And
I
you
was
were
trying to
very
hook
helpful.
you guys up too. Yeah.
Mhm.
'Cause, I liked working with you and I liked the record. And I think towards the end of that record, we were all striving for something better than the budget.
Yeah, and I think I was beyond happy with it. Like, I don't know if you could tell, there's a box up on the china cabinet. That's a box of Aaron's albums. We didn't get to
Ah.
sell all of them because at that point, people stopped buying CDs and they were only
Yeah.
about the streaming. At the time that we had on there, Aaron and I still talk about it as like one of the best periods of our lives. But there was an unfortunate incident that happened at your studio, and that's the building burned down, correct?
The place in West Babylon.
And then you ended up moving to Douglaston, New York, which is right by the Douglaston train station.
Yeah.
And when you got it, Aaron and I, we were just so happy for you. We were like, oh my God, George has his own studio now. But we didn't realize that for you to be able to maintain it, you had to constantly keep working.
For everyone that doesn't understand, we were in a monthly rehearsal building, and I shared a monthly rehearsal room with my band 3 years older. So they paid half the rent, or they paid almost half the rent, and then I covered the rest of the rent with my small recording studio. And that studio is only meant to do overdubs in. Like I kind of thought like I would track drums at Pi or another studio and then bring it back there and do vocals and guitar and tambourine or whatever, or the keyboards or whatever. And and I made a couple of records like that there. And then a good friend of mine, Rick, was like, oh, let's open our own studio. And the idea was to like open up like a couple of monthly rooms and with like a nicer, recording studio in it. Somebody informed me that Douglaston, the studio that has been there since the late 70s, was for sale.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an installation price. And that's basically like you buy the walls, you buy some of the equipment that they have, and you just move in. It's like a hermit crab, And I loved that studio, and then it worked into the budget. There was like a bidding war. We got in there. Actually, the bidding war didn't last long because the guy met me and then the people who were bidding against me and was like, I want to give you the studio. We got in there, and then one night, I lined up all these sessions at the smaller studio because I said, hey, my prices are going to go up a little bit. I'm going to be at the smaller studio for about a month and a half until we move into this bigger facility, but things will sound better and whatever. And then we're there one night. I'm mixing. I was trying to mix a band called Gracer. I got headphones on because my band who wanted to practice, and I was like, I gotta finish these mixing. So they were writing in the room next door. They borrowed the sleeping room to like write in, and they were playing in there for a little bit. And then I get a tap on the shoulder that there's a ton of smoke in the hallway, and I got headphones on.
Oh no.
And someone taps me on the shoulder and goes, I think the building's on fire. and
Oh,
I
for the
take the
love of
headphones off, and
Christ.
the alarm's going, and I'm like, fuck.
Uh-huh.
And I go and I look at this door, and there's just smoke. So there's about a 10-foot hallway, and directly across from my room, there's a door, and there's smoke billowing out of every part of this door. And I'm like, call the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they call the fire department. Me and one of the guitarists from Rich, from 3 years old, start going around the building to get everyone out. We're banging on doors. It's a rehearsal room, so like, there's tons of people. There's 14 rooms in there, so we're getting everyone out, banging on doors. Everyone's got to get out, blah, blah, blah. So I go back in my room and I see the smoke, and I'm like, I got to get shit out of this room. So I unplugged my computer. I didn't even turn it off. The mix was still printing.
Oh,
I
God.
unplugged my computer. When I turned it on a couple of weeks later, I saw where I unplugged like this session, like this, session file back or whatever. Like, the song was half recorded or whatever. I had like a lamp that I had for my family in that studio. That's the first thing I took out. It's a glass lamp, put that in my car. And then I just slowly made a bunch of trips. So I'd go in my room, I closed the door, there's no smoke. One of the trips, I poured water on a shirt I was wearing and put that over my nose so I wasn't, breathing in smoke. And I went in 6 times to get gear out,
Mm-hmm.
took out a bunch of guitars, took out a bunch of hard drives, and, took the computer out, took everything out.
I'm just
And
glad you survived it.
well, I talked to a firefighter about running into a burning building. He goes, it's not so bad.
Oh,
He's like, as
God.
long as you're protecting and you're not over breathing or doing anything, you're bad. And I was like, yeah, he's like, if you're cool and collected, it's not so bad. So then the cops show up. They're the first ones on the scene,
Mm-hmm.
and they go, what is this place? And then I explained to him, it's a rehearsal room. He goes, is everyone out? And I was like, we did one sweep already. Let's go back in. So then I brought them back in. So I went back in actually a 6th time, and then walked them through the building and made sure that everyone was out again. Everyone was out. Showed them what the exits were, showed them what everything was. And then the fire department showed up and started putting out the fire, which caused a lot of water to come in my room. So then I snuck back in to see what the water damage was like in my room, and started lifting drum sets and all that stuff like that up on the couch and amps and everything. So I didn't have that affected. And the fire department breaks every window and every door.
Right.
So I knew to leave my door unlocked. So they kicked my door open and nothing happened to it. So then we sat there till about 5 o'clock in the morning until they left. And I went in, locked up. There was no electricity for alarm, but, took out more stuff, and then went home. But I had no money. Like I was supposed to make a month's worth of recording sessions to move into this new studio.
Mm-hmm.
So then the next morning we went and signed the lease on Douglaston. So it was like poetic, but I was broke, and then I'm like trying to get Douglaston up and wiring and, spending money and doing all this stuff. And I started Douglaston behind the 8 ball. Like I just didn't have, the $1,000 that I needed to like get stuff done. And it was rough. And then that's just started like, I lost my apartment while I was in Douglaston, and I lived on the couch at Douglaston for about 2 years. I joined the 24-hour gym so I could leave. So I would leave with clients like at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd be like, all right, see you later. And I'd lock up. I'd get my car, I'd go to the gym, I'd work out and take a shower, come back and set my bed up on the couch and sleep on the couch in the back.
I did not
And
know
then-
he was doing this, by the way. When I
and
found
then,
out, I was ready to let him move in with me. If I had known you could have moved in with me rent free, dude, I would have been like, no. Because
And
I was
then,
living in Bayville at the time. I had an apartment. I had
Yeah, you were
a
close.
house. Yeah, and I was just like, George, I would have let you crash on my couch. You
And,
could have had a
you know-
home access to the fridge.
and then the next morning clean up and, hey, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And record a whole day and just do that process over and over.
And Aaron and I, we were saying to ourselves, wow, George is doing great for himself.
Yeah, no.
Oh, we
just
didn't
just
know.
to keep the lights on. I mean, with the loan payment, like the investor that got us in there, we didn't want to default on that. And then, we signed a 5-year lease with this wonderful woman who wanted music in her building. She
Mhm.
owned that building since the 70s, and she loved that there was a studio there, and we paid enough rent that was fair enough for her. Something would break, she'd like just get it fixed, attach the bill, pay me less next month. Like it was a leak happened, she would come and get someone to fix the leak. It was great. She sold the building to these people that thought they could knock the building down and build 24 apartments.
Oh God.
about 2.5 years into the lease. So what happened was these people came in and literally like was like, "Hey, we own the building. We don't want you here." It's the conversation I had with these people. Like, "Oh, we're gonna raise your rent as much as we can, as fast as we can." So then, we lawyered up. We did all this stuff. We fought them for about 2 years, and then it just was like they're never going to re-sign the lease with us. There's people measuring. We had a leak they never fixed, ruined the bass amp. Like,
Mhm.
there's tons of that stuff that we just fought, and then by the end of it, it just wasn't worth it. So
Thanks for watching part 2 of my interview with George Fullan. We're going to wrap it up soon with part 3, which will be up very soon. It'll probably be up by the time you actually watch this episode. I want to thank George again for being my special guest. Just want to remind everyone of the good name of Rat Salad Review Network. Please like and subscribe on YouTube to Rat Salad Review, and again on all available streaming media platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora. Just want to give a quick shout out to the fellow podcasts on the network, such as Beyond Bushido with James and Eric Adams, Suck My Balls, the South Park. I feel so weird saying that name every time, but it is one of the best podcasts out there. Definitely the best on South Park. Also to The Right Opinion. A big shout out to my co-hosts on Rat Salad Review, Wayne and Greg. Also to Ralph Vieira over at Vieira Vault, who just recently reunited with Ian Wadley for the Rock and Metal Combat Podcast. Welcome back, guys. Also a shout out to Decibel Geek, Chris and Aaron. That's a podcast that you should definitely check out for all fans of hard rock and heavy metal from all decades. It's late. I'm tired. Editing takes a while. And you guys have a good night. Bye.